Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take those huge historical moments, the ones everyone knows, and we really zoom in, find that single crucial point where everything turned.
That's right. And today, we're diving deep into Operation Deadstick.
Pegasus Bridge. The lightning-fast capture of those two absolutely critical bridges over the Orne River and the Canal back in Normandy, 1944.
It's an incredible story. Bloody minute-by-minute stuff.
So our mission today is pretty focused, right? We're deliberately stepping away from the big-picture generals, the Eisenhowers, the Montgomerys.
Yeah, exactly. We're going right down to the sharp end, to the company level. And our source material, it's really special for this.
How so?
Well, it's based on these really intensive, granular interviews, post-combat stuff, done 4 decades after D-Day.
40 years later. Wow.
Yeah, with over 24 guys who were actually there, including the commander, Major John Howard, and the pilot of that first glider, Staff Sergeant Jim Walwork.
So that gives us a perspective, a kind of detail you just don't get from the official histories, I imagine.
Absolutely. It's visceral. You feel it. But, there's a challenge with that, too.
Relying on memory 40 years on, even for something like D-Day, which, the source says it was the great day of their lives, stamped forever in their memories.
Right. Even so, pinning down the exact sequence, the timing, that becomes a huge research headache.
People remember things differently.
Exactly. The feeling, the terror, the big moments, the unexpected wins, those were rock solid in their minds. But the precise order, when exactly did that happen versus this? Lots of disagreement.
So how did the researchers manage that? How do you build a timeline?
They found one absolutely crucial anchor point. One moment that basically kicks off the entire D-Day invasion timeline, officially speaking.
Which was?
The moment the first glider crashed, they absolutely nailed that time down. Precisely 0016 hours, June 6th, 1944, 16 minutes past midnight.
And how could they be so precise after 40 years?
Well, this is where it gets tangible. They analyzed 2 wristwatches, Major Howard's watch, and one worn by a private in the glider. Both watches had stopped. Just stopped dead.
From the impact.
Exactly. The G-forces, the sheer violence of the glider hitting the Earth, stopped them cold at 001
Wow. So that single timestamp, derived from 2 broken watches, that's the official start of the Allied invasion of Normandy.
That's it. The whole thing kicked off right there, right then, with this tiny group of men, D Company, Oxfordshire, and Buckinghamshire light infantry hitting the dirt.
Just one company. The absolute spearhead of the entire Allied invasion force. Incredible.
It really is. So let's unpack how this small unit ended up with that, terrifying honor of kicking off the Battle of Normandy.
Okay, so to get why everything rested on Howard's guys, we need the bigger picture first. What was happening strategically leading up to 44?
Right, so up till then, the Allies have been heavily involved in the Mediterranean, North Africa, then Sicily, then pushing up into Italy through 42 and 43.
Which felt like progress.
Yeah, but it wasn't actually crippling Germany militarily. It was important politically, secured the southern flank, tied up German divisions, sure. But German industry, tanks, guns, their production actually hit its highest peaks, believe it or not, well into 1944. They were far, far from beaten.
So despite the Eastern Front, despite Italy, Hitler's main worry, his single biggest headache by early 1944, was finally the West.
Absolutely. He could see this massive buildup in the UK, 2.5 million Allied troops poised across the Channel. That concentration of force, that was an existential threat to Germany's industrial heartland.
And his response was the Atlantic Wall, which wasn't just a concept, it was a real thing.
Oh, massively real. You have to think on the scale of the Great Wall of China in terms of engineering effort. It ran all along the French and Belgian coasts, thousands of concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, trenches, minefields, underwater obstacles, anything you could think of to shred land, craft, and troops.
And that effort really ramped up when Rommel took command, didn't it? January 44.
It did. Rommel became obsessive, maniacal even. He believed the whole war hinged on the beaches. If the Allies got a solid foothold, game over. Their air power, their supplies would just overwhelm Germany. So for Rommel, every inch of coast was the main line of resistance. He drove the construction, the obstacle placement at an absolutely frenzied pace.
Because the Germans knew they had a window, right? That initial landing phase was key.
Their best shot, maybe their only shot, was to throw the Allies back into the sea within the first 48 hours, before they could get properly established.
Which leads us straight to Eisenhower's biggest problem. The moment his troops hit the beaches, they were at their most vulnerable. Why was that logistical weakness so acute?
It's down to physics, really. And engineering. Those initial landing craft, they just couldn't carry the heavy stuff ashore quickly. Tanks, heavy artillery, that had to wait for the beaches to be secured, wait for specialized landing ships, mulberry harbors later on.
So the first guys ashore were basically light infantry against prepared defenses.
Exactly, and they'd be heavily outnumbered, not just by the local garrison, but critically by the German reserves, especially the panzers, that could react. The source material we're looking at suggests initially maybe a 10-to-1 disadvantage for the Allies.
10 to 1?
Yeah, terrifying. And even a month later, deep into the campaign, they'd still only be looking at maybe 5-to-1 against the Germans dug in.
And this vulnerability, this weak point, was particularly bad on the British left flank, near Sword Beach.
Precisely. That area east of the Orne River was closest to the city of Caen. Caen was a major road and rail hub, absolutely vital, and Rommel knew it. He'd stationed 2 extremely dangerous armored divisions nearby, basically coiled and ready to strike.
These weren't just any old tank units, though.
No, definitely not. You had the 12th SS Panzer Division, the Hitler-Jugend, young, fanatical Nazis, highly motivated, absolutely ruthless.
And the other one?
The 21st Panzer Division, a veteran unit, very effective, and commanded by Colonel Hans von Luck, one of Rommel's own protégés, a really sharp commander.
So Eisenhower's nightmare scenario was these 2 panzer divisions rolling west, hitting Sword Beach from the flank.
Exactly. A swift, coordinated counterpunch. They could potentially roll up the entire British landing, drive the 3rd Infantry Division straight back into the sea before they could get their own tanks and heavy guns ashore. That was the ultimate catastrophe scenario, keeping Eisenhower awake at night.
Okay, so the solution to protect these vulnerable flanks involved airborne troops, dropping guys behind the lines.
Massive use of airborne forces. The U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne dropped on the western flank over by Utah Beach to secure causeways and river crossings there. And on the critical eastern flank, the British 6th Airborne Division.
And their job was mainly defensive.
Primarily defensive, yes, to seize the crossings over the Orne River and the Caen Canal, east of Caen, and then establish a strong blocking position, a barrier to stop those panzers from swinging west and hitting the beaches.
Those 2 bridges we mentioned earlier, Pegasus Bridge being the Canal Bridge, were key.
Absolutely crucial. If the Germans held them intact, the panzers had an easy route straight into the flank of the landings. If the British destroyed them, their own airborne troops would be cut off without reinforcement or heavy equipment. So the bridges had to be captured intact by the British.
Seize them, hold them. A double challenge.
A nightmare challenge, frankly.
But this whole plan, using elite airborne divisions mainly for defensive blocking, it wasn't universally popular within the Allied command, was it? General Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, had issues.
He did, yeah. George C. Marshall was pretty critical. He looked at 4 elite airborne divisions, the absolute cream of the crop in terms of training and fighting spirit, and saw them being used in what he called a wasteful dispersion, just holding ground, essentially.
What did Marshall want to do instead?
He argued for something much, much bolder. A single, massive, concentrated drop, 3 divisions landing deep inland, maybe 75 miles near Évreux.
75 miles inland. Why there? What was the thinking?
Marshall figured a powerful force landing that deep would completely shatter German command and control, paralyze their response across the whole front. He wanted to use the airborne as a strategic hammer blow, not just a localized shield on the flanks.
So why did Eisenhower, who was known for being pretty aggressive himself, reject that? Why go for the more conservative flank protection?
Eisenhower looked back at the Anzio landings in Italy earlier that year. That was a deep landing, but the force got isolated, contained by the Germans, and nearly wiped out. He worried the same thing would happen in Normandy.
Even with 3 divisions?
Even with 3. He argued they'd lack mobility once on the ground. They wouldn't have heavy firepower initially. Rommel, who was already expecting an invasion somewhere, would just gather his panzer reserves and annihilate them piecemeal before they could be properly supplied or reinforced.
So for Eisenhower, keeping that link to the sea, ensuring the flow of supplies and follow-on armor from the beaches was non-negotiable.
Absolutely paramount. The defensive success on the flanks, holding those bridges, bought the critical time needed to build up the beachhead. It was a compromise, really, between safety and, strategic ambition. A necessary compromise, as it turned out.
Okay, let's zoom back in. From the grand strategy down to the men who actually had to pull off this necessary compromise. Major John Howard and his D Company. What made Howard the guy for this seemingly impossible job?
Howard's a fascinating figure. Working-class Londoner, which was pretty unusual for an officer back then, rose through the ranks. And he'd been a policeman before the war, walked a beat in London.
How did that influence him?
Well, the source suggests it gave him two key things. One, an almost obsessive attention to detail, fanatical about it. And two, he was comfortable operating in the dark, really comfortable. He knew how to move quietly, how to observe, how to use the shadows, a creature of the night, the book calls him. And he poured that intensity, that ethos, into training D Company.
And the training sounds like it was something else. 2 years of it.
Unbelievably intense, not your standard infantry drills. 2 solid years focused purely on combat readiness, extreme physical fitness, designed to strip away hesitation, make reactions instinctive.
They used live ammunition in training, right?
Yeah, get this. They did street fighting exercises using live rounds in the bombed-out ruins of British cities like Coventry and Southampton. Didn't care about property damage. They wanted their men used to the crack and zip of real bullets, used to reacting under genuine fire.
That's extreme.
It really was. There's a great story about one of his men, Private Wally Parr, that really shows Howard's style.
Go on.
So Parr was known as a bit of a scallywag, a character, a rule breaker, but also a natural leader, born leader type. Anyway, he gets busted down to Private for some huge prank in the barracks, apparently involved emptying loads of soap flakes onto the wet cobblestones, caused chaos.
Sounds like fun, but not very military.
Exactly. Howard's commanding officer wanted Parr kicked out of the company, but Howard refused point blank. He supposedly said, "Sir, Parr is the man who will be promoted immediately when we get to the other side."
Why? Why keep the troublemaker?
Because Howard valued initiative, combat effectiveness, guts. He knew that in the chaos of real battle, guys like Parr, the ones who thought outside the box, they were the ones who'd thrive. Peacetime discipline was secondary to that.
Okay, so the mission itself, seizing bridges intact. It was called a coup de main. What does that actually mean?
It's French, translates literally as strike of force. Basically, a surprise attack designed to grab a key objective incredibly quickly before the enemy can react, a sudden, decisive blow.
And Howard's boss, General Gale, he didn't just invent this idea for Normandy.
No, not at all. He was heavily influenced by the Germans, actually. Their successful glider assaults earlier in the war, taking the Belgian fortress Ibn Emel in 1940 and capturing the bridge over the Corinth Canal in Greece in 41. Both were stunning successes, using gliders to land troops right on top of the objective.
The idea was deliver a large force silently right onto the target. Total surprise.
That was the core principle. Achieve surprise, overwhelm the defenders instantly.
Which relied entirely on the pilots, the glider pilot regiment. Guys like Staff Sergeant Walwork, these must have been exceptional airmen.
Oh, the absolute elite. Supposedly, less than a third of the volunteers who tried even made it through their training course. It was brutal.
And their aircraft was the Horsa glider? What was that like?
Huge thing. Made entirely of wood, plywood mostly to save metal, which was vital for fighters and bombers. You could carry 28 fully armed soldiers, or a jeep and a light anti-tank gun. Massive payload for a glider.
Wooden. Big. Sounds fragile. Landing that precisely must have been terrifying.
Incredibly fragile, yes. And apparently it made this distinct whistling sound as it came down. But it was much, much quieter than a powered aircraft. That silence bought them precious maybe minutes of surprise.
And their training for this specific mission for Deadstick was unique.
Hyper-specific. They weren't just learning to fly gliders, they were learning to fly this route, this landing. They practiced flying purely by time and course, using stopwatches and compasses. They even wore special colored goggles to simulate night flying conditions during the day.
Wow. And get this, they studied a moving picture film, like a simulation. It showed the exact flight path, the landmarks, everything, right up to the landing zone. Walwork later said the film even cut out at the exact moment of the simulated crash. Perfect prep, eh?
Incredible. But success wasn't just about the flying, was it? The intelligence Howard had seems almost unbelievable.
It was extraordinary, truly unparalleled for an operation at this level. Howard had what he called bigot clearance. That was the highest security classification, even above top secret, reserved for people who absolutely needed to know the D-Day plans.
And what did that give him access to?
He worked with this huge 12-foot square topographical model of the bridges, the villages of Bénouville and Ranville, everything. It was updated daily based on RAF photo reconnaissance flights. They knew the height of the canal banks, the position of every single telegraph pole, every machine gun nest, every strand of barbed wire.
But the really game-changing intel, the stuff that shaped the assault plan, didn't come from aerial photos, did it? It came from the ground, from the French resistance. This is one of the most amazing parts of the story. Right next to the Canal Bridge, Pegasus Bridge, there is this little cafe run by Georges and Therese Gondry.
The famous Café Gondry?
That's the one. Georges was in the resistance, spoke good English. His wife, Therese, she was originally from Alsace-Lorraine, so she spoke perfect German. But she kept that a secret from the German soldiers who used her cafe all the time.
Clever. So she could listen in.
Exactly. And she overheard conversations, including one absolutely critical tidbit of information.
Which was?
She heard the Germans talking about the demolition charges for the bridge, specifically where the electrical firing button was located. It wasn't in some command bunker miles away. It was right there, inside the machine gun pillbox at the western end of the bridge.
That single piece of information.
It changed everything. It dictated Howard's entire assault plan. He knew the #1 priority the instant they landed was to take out that specific pillbox, neutralize the demolition threat immediately.
So on one side, you've got Howard with this meticulous plan, incredible intel, fanatically trained troops. And on the other side, the German defenders. Major Schmidt.
The contrast is stark, really. Howard knew precisely when the tough units, like the 21st Panzer and some German paratroopers under Sergeant Heinrich Hickman, had moved into the general area in mid-May. But the guys actually guarding the bridges, they were from the 716th Infantry Division.
Which wasn't exactly an elite unit.
No, it was considered low quality, mostly made up of older conscripts or guys from Eastern Europe forced into German service. Their commander at the bridges was Major Hans Schmidt. And Schmidt, well, he'd had years of pretty cushy occupation duty in France. He'd gotten complacent. Relaxed.
Complacent how?
Crucially, while the bridges were wired for demolition, the explosives were physically attached. Schmidt hadn't actually put the detonators or the primer charges into the chambers yet.
Why not?
He was worried about accidents, either sabotage by the resistance or maybe even his own somewhat unreliable troops setting them off by mistake. Plus, the weather had been really stormy in the days leading up to June 6th. He figured no one would try an airborne landing in that kind of weather. He was completely wrong, of course, and Allied intelligence knew about this complacency. It was a calculated risk based on that knowledge.
Okay, so the night of June 5th rolls into June 6th. The gliders are approaching the coast. Let's put ourselves inside Walwork's lead glider. Midnight to 00 for 5 hours. What's the atmosphere? The tension must have been just off the charts.
Unbearable, you have to imagine. Outside, on the ground, it's relatively quiet. German sentries are on duty. But we know from later accounts, one Polish conscript guarding the bridge, Private Bonk, decided this was the perfect moment to sneak off to the local brothel in Benneville with a mate. Tells you something about the garrison's alertness, doesn't it?
It certainly does. What about inside the glider?
Cramped, dark, noisy from the wind, whistling past the wooden frame. Men are trying to keep it together. Wally Parr, the scallywag, is apparently singing loudly a Cockney song called Abby, Abby my boy. Just bizarre, singing your way into combat like that.
Trying to keep spirits up?
Yeah.
Or just nervous energy?
Probably a bit of both. Then you've got Captain Vaughn, the company doctor.
He wasn't happy, was he?
Not remotely. He was terrified. Sitting right by the open doorway, no parachute glider troops didn't usually wear them for these landings, convinced the whole wooden crate was just going to disintegrate on impact. Just totally gripped by fear.
And Major Howard?
Howard was apparently unnaturally calm. Silent. Just watching the second hand on his watch sweep towards 0007 hours, 7 minutes past midnight. That's when Walwork got the signal and cast off the tow rope from the Halifax bomber.
The point of no return. They're on their own, gliding silently towards the coast.
Exactly. And Walwork's job now was just incredibly difficult, flying purely by compass and stopwatch. He'd come down fast from 7,000 feet to get under radar and minimize time in the air, making precise turns based on time and heading, aiming for this tiny patch of ground.
How big was the landing zone?
Tiny, maybe 200 yards long, 100 yards wide, right next to the Canal Bridge. And remember, the glider was overloaded. Dangerously so.
And then Citto, 16 hours, impact.
Wow.
How close did he actually get?
Walwork performed what Ambrose calls a magnificent feat of flying. He slammed the Horsa down just 50 yards from the bridge embankment, 50 yards, right where Howard wanted him. They crashed with the outer barbed wire fence surrounding the bridge defenses.
The violence must have been extreme.
Huge impact, debris flying everywhere, men thrown around, but the key thing, total absolute surprise.
And immediate action followed that surprise.
The second the glider juddered to a halt, the doors burst open. Out poured Howard's men, faces blackened with camo cream, wearing their denizen smocks. The one German sentry who saw them land, Helmut Romer, later said they looked like they were blending savagery and civilization. He just froze for a heartbeat.
Then what?
Then instinct kicked in. He turned and ran like hell towards the bridge defenses, screaming, Fallschirmjäger! Fallschirmjäger! Paratroopers! He had no idea they'd come by glider. They just appeared out of the night.
While he's running, Corporal Bailey's section is already moving on the primary target.
Instantly, straight for the machine gun pillbox. The one Therese Gondry's intel said held the demolition plunger. They didn't hesitate. Grenades went in. Cleared it out. Luckily for them, no one was alive inside when the dust settled.
And the engineers, the sabbers, were right behind them.
Right on their heels, checking the wiring, confirming the demolition charges weren't primed. Everything happening in seconds. Brutal, planned efficiency.
But that efficiency, that speed, came at a cost, almost immediately.
A devastating cost to the leadership. Lieutenant Dembrotheridge was leading the 1st Platoon, number 1 Platoon, charging across the bridge itself. He was hit by a burst of machine gun fire from the eastern bank, went down almost instantly.
The first British soldier killed by enemy action in the invasion.
Yes. Leading from the front, paying the ultimate price within minutes of landing.
While this is happening, the other 2 gliders assigned to the Canal Bridge are landing.
Right behind Wallworks. Glider number 2 and number 3. They crash land slightly further back, around 17,018 hours. More chaos, more injuries. Lieutenant David Wood in number 2 was knocked unconscious. Lieutenant Sandy Smith in number 3.
The one thrown through the cockpit.
That's him. Thrown clear through the Perspex windshield, suffered a horrific injury to his wrist, apparently just shattered bone sticking out. But his training, it was so deeply ingrained, he didn't panic. He instinctively grabbed a Sten gun with his good hand and started directing his men, moving towards the objective, firing, operating purely on adrenaline and training.
Incredible resilience. And what was the verdict from the sappers checking the bridge structure itself?
The best possible news. Confirmation. The bridges were wired for demolition, just as Intel suspected. The explosive charges were there, strapped to the girders. But
no detonators?
No detonators, no primers inserted. Major Schmidt's caution, his fear of accidents, had inadvertently saved the entire Allied left flank. It was an unbelievable stroke of luck, confirming the intelligence gamble had paid off.
So by what time does Howard get the all clear on the bridge demolitions?
Amazingly fast, by 00022 hours. Just 6 minutes after the first glider hit the ground, 6 minutes, he gets the report. Canal Bridge secure, demolition system neutralized. Then confirmation from the River Bridge team comes through shortly after.
And the code word goes out.
The message is flashed back to headquarters in England. Ham and Jam, the prearranged code. Ham for the Canal Bridge, Pegasus. Jam for the River Bridge, Horsa Bridge later. Both bridges captured intact. An absolutely stunning success, achieved by barely a reinforced company of men.
But it wasn't all perfect execution, was it? There were risks, and one glider went completely astray.
That's right. A reminder of how easily things could go wrong. Glider number 4, carrying Captain Ronnie Plasticity and his platoon, was supposed to land near the Canal Bridge, too. They got lost in cloud, the tow rope snapped prematurely, or maybe navigation error. Whatever happened, they ended up landing about 20 kilometers away, near the river dives.
So a whole platoon just vanished from Howard's available strength.
Instantly. 1/6 of his fighting power, gone. Unable to influence the main battle at all. Shows the knife edge they were on.
What about the River Bridge, the jam part of the signal? How did that go?
That was glider number 6, commanded by Lieutenant Tony Fox. They landed reasonably accurately near the River Bridge. Slightly after the Canal Bridge landings, they faced immediate machine gun fire from the eastern bank. But Sergeant Wagger Thornton?
This same Sergeant Thornton who later deals with the tanks?
The very same. He was with Fox's platoon initially. He managed to get their light mortar into action incredibly quickly and dropped a bomb described as a fabulous shot right onto the German MG-34 position that was pinning them down. Silenced it. That allowed Fox's men to rush across the river bridge and secure it pretty quickly.
Okay, so bridge is secured, ham and jam, but that was just phase 1. Now they had to hold them against whatever the Germans could throw at them, potentially for hours, until relief arrived. And Howard's facing a serious problem almost immediately.
A massive problem. Leadership. In those first few chaotic minutes, he'd lost half his platoon commanders. Brotheridge dead, Wood unconscious, Smith terribly wounded, though still somehow functioning. 3 out of 6 platoon lieutenants taken out.
For a normal infantry company, that would be crippling. Collapse, probably.
It could easily have been. But this is where that obsessive 2-year training regime really paid off. This company wasn't solely reliant on its officers. The NCOs, the sergeants and corporals, were trained to an incredibly high standard. They knew the plan inside out. They were expected to take initiative.
So guys just stepped up.
Immediately. Corporals like Caen, sergeants like Thornton, who we just mentioned, they didn't wait for orders. They knew what needed doing, consolidating positions, setting up fields of fire, getting the wounded dealt with, and they just did it. The training had prepared them for this exact scenario. Leadership depth was crucial.
Meanwhile, the Germans are starting to react. Major Schmidt, the garrison commander.
Yeah, Schmidt. Having presumably enjoyed his comfortable evening, he's now alerted to the chaos. He tries to get from his HQ in nearby Ranville across the bridges to see what's going on. Bad move.
Why? What happened?
He basically drove right into the British perimeter near the river bridge. Sweeney's platoon intercepted his staff car. Schmidt was badly wounded in the firefight and captured.
What did he say?
Apparently he was hysterical, screaming about failing the Fuhrer, demanding his captors shoot him because he was so humiliated. His capture was actually a bit of an intelligence bonus for Howard. It confirmed the local command was in disarray and hadn't yet grasped the full scale of the situation, or mobilized the real threat.
The real threat being the Panzers, the tanks. Howard must have known they'd come eventually. What did he actually have to stop them?
Next to nothing. That was his biggest worry. Their main anti-tank weapon was the Piat. Projector, infantry, anti-tank.
What exactly was a Piat? Not like a bazooka.
Sort of, but different. It was this weird, heavy, spring-loaded spigot mortar thing, fired a shaped charge bomb. It had no backblast like a bazooka, which was good for firing from building, but it was notoriously difficult to cock, prone to jamming, and the recoil was brutal.
And its range.
Officially, the effective range was about 50 yards against tanks. 50 yards. But its reliability, even at that range, was questionable. You needed a solid hit on the right spot, and the rough landings hadn't helped.
How so?
Wally Parr's Piat got bent on impact. Lieutenant Fox's Piat over at the river bridge was completely smashed. So as the night wore on, the entire anti-tank defense for both bridges, against potentially dozens of German tanks, it rested on one single working Piat.
One Piat.
Yeah.
Held by
Sergeant Wagger Thornton, the same guy who'd made that mortar shot earlier. The fate of the entire left flank of the D-Day invasion literally came down to this one sergeant and his notoriously unreliable weapon.
So the moment of truth arrives. Around 0130 hours, 1:30 in the morning, German armor starts probing towards the bridges.
This is the absolute crucible, the first German armored counterattack. It seems to have been a hasty, local reaction, probably elements of the 21st Panzer's Reconnaissance Battalion, and they made a critical mistake.
Which was?
They advanced without infantry support, no soldiers out front scouting, just tanks Mark IVs, probably rumbling down the road towards the Canal Bridge in the dark, lights blazing. They literally didn't realize they were crossing into enemy-held territory. They thought the bridges were still secure.
Incredible lack of reconnaissance. And Thornton is waiting. He later said he was shaking like a bloody leaf.
Can you imagine the noise, the headlights bearing down? But he held his nerve. He knew the Piat was dodgy at range. He had to let the lead tank get close, really close, to guarantee penetration.
How close?
He waited and waited until the lead Mark IV was just 30 yards away. 30! That's practically spitting distance. Well inside the Piat's supposed effective range, giving the bomb the best chance. Pure, raw courage.
And he fires.
He fires, and the shot is perfect. It hits the Mark IV, penetrates the armor, and seems to have set off ammunition or fuel inside. The tank just erupts. Instantaneous, violent explosion. It brewed up immediately.
What did that look like?
The men there described it as an hour-long fireworks display, burning fiercely, rounds cooking off inside, lighting up the whole bridgehead. A massive flaming roadblock.
That one shot.
Yeah.
The effect must have been huge. Psychologically and tactically.
Monumental, absolutely monumental. The second German tank in the column, seeing the lead tank obliterated in front of it, just stopped dead. Then it reversed and pulled back rapidly.
They didn't press the attack.
No. And crucially, the German tank commander reported back up his chain of command that the British defenders at the bridge had 6-pounder anti-tank guns. Proper artillery pieces, not just infantry Piats.
Why did they think that? The Piat wasn't that powerful.
Maybe the violence of the explosion, the suddenness, whatever the reason, this misidentification, this massive overestimation of the British defenses caused by Thornton's single, incredibly brave shot was critical. It made the Germans pause, hesitate, reevaluate. It bought Howard's men absolutely vital time. Hours, probably.
And just as this is happening, help is starting to arrive. The main airborne force.
Around the same time, yes, roughly 0130 onwards, elements of the 7th Parachute Battalion who were supposed to reinforce D Company began to filter in.
But they were in bad shape, too.
Really bad shape. They'd been scattered badly during the drop due to heavy flak and navigation issues. They were arriving piecemeal, severely under strength. Maybe less than a third of the battalion managed to reach the bridges initially. Disoriented, tired, landing in darkness in unknown territory.
How did they even find the bridges in the dark and confusion?
Well, according to the accounts, Major Howard provided a beacon. He stood near the bridge and continuously whistled a simple tune.
Whistling in the middle of all this.
The V for victory signal. ... over and over. That distinctive sound carried through the night air, through the sporadic gunfire. It acted as a rallying point, a moral booster, and a simple navigational aid for the scattered paratroopers trying to find their way to the objective. A small detail, but indicative of Howard's cool head.
And amidst all the fighting, the explosions, the whistling, there's this little human moment happening at the cafe.
The liberation of the Gondries. Once the paratroopers started arriving and it seemed the bridges were truly secure, Georges Gondry, the cafe owner, rushed out into his garden.
What does he do?
He started digging. He'd buried 98 bottles of champagne back in 1940 when the Germans arrived. Hidden them all that time. He dug them up and started handing them out to Howard and the first paratroopers. An incredible gesture, the first taste of liberation.
That cafe became quite famous after the war, didn't it?
Hugely famous, a site of pilgrimage for veterans for decades. Still run by the family today, I believe. A real tangible link to that night.
And the bridge itself wasn't officially named Pegasus Bridge until later.
That came in 1954. Officially renamed in honor of the emblem of the British Airborne Forces, the winged horse, Pegasus, worn on their sleeves. Cemented the legend of the place and the men who took it. #tagged V, daybreak, and lasting significance.
So the longest night starts to end. Dawn breaks on June 6th. The bridges are held, but the fighting isn't over, and reinforcements are still needed. The next big arrival was Lord Lovett's commandos.
That's right. They were part of the main seaborne landings on Sword Beach. Their job was to fight their way inland and link up with the airborne forces at the bridges, relieving Howard's men. They finally arrived around 1:00 p.m., 1300 hours, significantly later than planned.
How did Howard know it was them?
By the sound, the unmistakable sound of bagpipes. Lord Lovett's personal piper, Bill Millen, marched across the bridge playing Highland tunes. This wasn't just for show. It was actually a prearranged recognition signal between Lovett, Howard, and the commander of the 7th Battalion, Pinecoffin. The sound of the pipes confirmed the link-up. Psychologically huge for the defenders.
But Lovett's arrival, characteristic of him perhaps, wasn't without some drama and casualties.
Yeah, Lovett was a very dashing, almost flamboyant figure. Howard warned him that German snipers still had the bridge zeroed in. They'd been taking pot shots all morning. He advised Lovett's men to dash across quickly, maybe in small groups.
And Lovett?
Lovett apparently scoffed and said something like, "Commandos never run." He insisted on marching his men across formally, with Piper Millen playing. The result? Predictable, sadly. German snipers picked off about a dozen of his commandos completely unnecessarily as they crossed. A moment of bravado that cost lives.
Where was this sniper fire coming from? The Germans were still resisting strongly nearby.
Oh, yes. Very intense, very accurate sniper fire all morning. It was mainly coming from two key locations that dominated the bridge area. One was a tall concrete water tower nearby, gave a perfect field of view.
And the other?
The other was the Château de Bénouville, a large, imposing building right near the Canal Bridge. Unfortunately, and tragically, it was being used as a civilian maternity hospital at the time. But the Germans were definitely firing from windows or the grounds.
Meanwhile, what about the big threat? The 21st Panzer Division. Were they finally committed during the day?
They were finally given the green light to attack, yes, sometime after midday. But by then, it was almost too late for them to be truly effective against the bridges.
Why? What happened?
The moment they started to move out of their assembly areas and towards Caen and the Orne crossings, Allied air power just descended on them. Fighter bombers, naval gunfire support from the ships offshore. They were hammered relentlessly. Their advance became disjointed, piecemeal. Tanks were forced to button up, losing visibility. They couldn't coordinate a proper, concentrated assault on the bridgehead. They were battered before they even got close.
Which brings us back to Private Wally Parr, the scallywag. He has another moment, doesn't he? Involving a captured German gun.
He does. It's pure Wally Parr. After things quieted down a bit, he and some mates found a captured German anti-tank gun. A 50mm Pak 38, probably, left behind in its emplacement near the bridge.
Howard hadn't trained them on German artillery, though.
Nope, just small arms.
Ah.
So Parr and his buddies basically gathered around this unfamiliar piece of kit and started fiddling with it. Trial and error. What's this lever do? Where does the shell go? They figured out how to load and fire it themselves.
Resourceful. What did they shoot at?
They were still getting plagued by that sniper fire. They were convinced, quite rightly, that some of it was coming from the top floor of that big building nearby the Chateau de Bénouville.
The maternity hospital. Did they know?
Apparently not at that moment. They just saw muzzle flashes, knew they were getting shot at from there. So Parr gleefully starts pumping 50mm shells into the upper stories of the chateau, effectively silencing the snipers.
Until Howard intervened.
Exactly. Howard sees these shells hitting the chateau, knows exactly what building it is, and sprints over. Horrified, he orders Parr to cease fire immediately, telling him in no uncertain terms, "You're shelling a bloody maternity hospital, Parr. It's full of women and babies."
Parr must have been mortified.
He was. He later recounted the story, saying, with some embarrassment, it was the first and very definitely the last time he ever shelled a hospital.
And the irony is, later German reports accused the British of deliberately shelling the hospital.
Complete inversion of the facts. A German report claimed British artillery had shelled the hospital as a deliberate act of terror. Shows you the fog of war, the instant propaganda. It's a chaotic picture.
So after holding the bridges through the night, repelling counterattacks, linking up with reinforcements, dealing with snipers, when did Howard finally hand over command? What was the cost to D Company?
They held the bridges for almost exactly 24 hours after landing. Howard formally handed over command, bridges intact and secure, late on D-Day. His original company started with 181 men, plus some attachments. After that continuous, intense combat, they were down to about 76 effectives still standing.
Boy, the casualty.
Remarkably light considering what they achieved and what they faced. The source states 2 killed Lieutenant Brotheridge being 1 and 14 wounded. An incredibly low price for such a vital victory, testament to their skill and maybe that element of luck.
And the significance of that victory, holding those bridges. We touched on it, but let's really underline it.
It cannot be overstated. It was the absolute linchpin for the entire Allied left flank on D-Day. As we said, it prevented that nightmare scenario. The panzers rolling straight into the side of the Sword Beach landings.
And forced them to go around.
Exactly. By denying the Germans the direct route across the Orne, the 6th Airborne forced the subsequent, much more powerful German armored counterattacks, particularly the elite Panzer Lehr Division, when it arrived to take long detours. They had to try and push through the bombed-out ruins of Caen or attack the main British forces head-on, where Allied air and naval power could pulverize them. It fundamentally shaped the entire battle for Normandy for the next 7 weeks. It dictated where the Germans could fight and largely ensured they fought on Allied terms in that crucial sector.
The historian Stephen Ambrose, whose work heavily informs our source, boils down the success to 4 main factors. Let's quickly recap those.
Okay. First, training. We've talked about it a lot. Possibly the best trained company for a specific mission in military history. That depth allowed NCOs to take over seamlessly.
Second.
Brilliant planning and intelligence. Howard knew the ground, knew the enemy's dispositions, and crucially, knew about that demolition plunger, thanks to Therese Gondry. That intel was gold.
Third, the pilots.
The execution by the glider pilots, specifically Walworth's landing. That pinpoint accuracy under immense pressure in the dark. It was a one-off feat of extraordinary skill and bravery. Without that precise landing, the whole thing fails in the first minute.
And finally, the 4th element.
Luck. You can't deny it. Just sheer dumb luck played a huge part. Major Schmidt not putting the detonators in. A stray bomb from an earlier Allied raid hitting the bridge but proving to be a dud, landing harmlessly in the canal. Thornton's single Piet shot happening to hit exactly the right spot to cause that catastrophic explosion in the tank. And maybe the biggest piece of luck.
Hitler sleeping in.
Hitler sleeping in, and the rigid command structure that meant the panzer divisions couldn't be fully released without his personal authorization. That delay was priceless for the Allies.
So thinking back to General Marshall's criticism, was this conservative plan a wasteful dispersion of elite troops? Or was Eisenhower right?
Looking back, you have to say Eisenhower was proven right. The success depended entirely on that tight link to the beachhead, the ability to reinforce and supply the airborne troops relatively quickly. If any one of those factors had failed, especially if Schmidt had primed those charges, the flank would likely have collapsed. Marshall's bold deep drop might have been spectacular for a day, but it probably would have ended in disaster. That cautious approach, backed by incredibly aggressive execution at the tactical level, was the winning formula here. Hashtag tag Chagsy's outro and provocative thought.
As we kind of pull back from the minute-by-minute battle, the source material draws a really interesting contrast, doesn't it, between the guys fighting on each side.
It really does. It contrasts the spirit of D Company, all volunteers, highly motivated, eager to be there, with the attitude of many of the German troops they faced, particularly in the 716th Division.
Many of whom were conscripts, right? Poles, Russians, older Germans, not exactly fervent Nazis, eager to die for the Fuhrer.
Exactly. The source suggests that many of these German units tended to, well, fade away or surrender pretty quickly once their experienced German officers or NCOs were killed or captured. The top-down structure was rigid. When the head was cut off, the body often faltered.
Whereas D Company.
Completely different ethos, every man a volunteer. Steeped in this tradition of initiative, when officers went down, NCOs and privates like Parr stepped up. They didn't wait to be told, they acted. The source concludes, pretty strongly, that this was ultimately one for freedom, won by an army of the free, that the democratic ethos, the trust in the individual soldier, made a real difference on the ground.
That idea of trust seems key. General Gale trusted Howard, Howard trusted his NCOs, they trusted their men.
Right down the line, superiors trusted the man on the spot to use his head to adapt, which, despite the German army's reputation for efficiency, was something their system, especially under the Nazis, often struggled with. Initiative could be dangerous in that regime.
And maybe the most powerful legacy of this whole story isn't the strategy or the battle itself, but what happened afterwards. The human connections.
It's quite stunning, really. These weren't just abstract enemies. Decades later, there was reconciliation.
Tell us about Howard and his opposite number.
Major John Howard became genuine friends, good friends, with Colonel Hans von Luck, the commander of the 21st Panzer Regiment that eventually counterattacked the bridges. His direct opponent on the day. They actually ended up co-lecturing together at military academies, talking about leadership from both sides.
Amazing. And there was another connection, even more personal.
Even more so. Sergeant Heinrich Hickman, the German paratrooper who was firing at the British from the Eastern Bank that night, he actually emigrated to England after the war, changed his name to Henry, and he met Private Billy Gray, one of the Ox and Bucks soldiers he'd been shooting at on the bridge.
Yeah.
They became intimate friends, lifelong friends. Apparently, they used to meet up regularly and joke about how poor their marksmanship must have been that night since they both survived.
It really brings it all down to the human level, doesn't it? Beyond the maps and strategies. The success of Operation Deadstick, secured in those first 6 unbelievably chaotic minutes, really did ensure the D-Day landings didn't fail on the left flank.
Absolutely. It's a story of incredible planning, incredible training, nerve, luck, and ultimately individuals making the difference. Knowledge applied, critical thinking, and finding that human story within the big strategic picture.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. We talked about luck, including Hitler's delayed orders due to the rigid German command structure. Führer Directive 51 meant major panzer movements needed his personal Weissbay. So here's the question. If arguably the most efficient, best-equipped fighting force in the world at the time, the German panzer divisions, can be paralyzed because they need explicit permission from a sleeping dictator miles away, how valuable is brilliant military planning if initiative down the chain is restricted, even forbidden?
What does the ability of individuals like Sergeant Thornton, relying on his nerve and a dodgy weapon, or Wally Parr figuring out a captured gun, to act decisively on their own initiative? What does that tell us compared to the paralysis of those German tanks waiting for an order that came too late?
Where does real strength, real resilience in any organization, military, corporate, whatever, truly come from? If it rigid top-down control or empowered individual action? Something to think about.